Good evening again. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Joseph Teipel. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director at the Chaffee County Community Foundation, one of the partners on this project. And I'm joined by my two other colleagues focusing on this work. So Bob and Becky, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves briefly.
Sure. This is Bob. I'm Bob Grether. I'm a local architect. Been in Salida for about 21 years now and been working on various projects, including the steam plant and stuff like that. And so I was just very excited to have the opportunity to work with Becky and Joseph on this project. I think it's going to be a really nice prototype. I hope that we see it repeated elsewhere, but I think it's a very exciting project. I think it's going to serve a really wide variety of needs we have here in a very, modest sized project. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun. I look forward to it.
And hi, for those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Becky Gray, and I serve Chaffee County as the Director of Housing. This is a really exciting opportunity. I'm super thrilled to present this project because it really meets a lot of our community's needs that can't get met through more traditional approaches to creating affordable housing, which we'll get to later in the presentation. But thanks so much for joining us and bringing your friend Rick. We appreciate everybody taking the time to be here tonight.
Great. Well, thank you for those introductions. And if you're just joining us, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and either affiliation to Jane and or how you learned about this meeting in the chat, that would be wonderful. If you don't have access to the chat, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. But our goal tonight is really to go over the project, introduce it to you, discuss it with you, get your input on various aspects, and then help you understand where the next steps lie. Part of what we're going to be talking about is making sure that this project aligns, as folks were just mentioning, with community priorities and with community needs, and aligns with Jane's legacy and Jane's vision, as well as many other things. So just one moment while I take care of a couple of Zoom things. And while I'm on that, please note a couple of Zoom norms. We're going to be hopefully having everyone stay on mute unless you're talking, and that just helps with our background noise. So if you wouldn't mind monitoring that, and Becky will help me do that. If you do want to ask a question, make a comment, first and foremost, feel free to use that chat feature. But if you don't have access to that, or you just want to jump in, this is meant to be a dialogue as well. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go through. A couple of other things that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to hear from a couple of community members about this project, and also talk about where it's going in next steps. So again, thank you for being with us. With that, I am going to turn it over to Becky, and she is going to kick us off.
We're going to start a really exciting conversation with some relatively boring data, but it's really kind of the impetus of this creative idea that we're going to present today. So the spreadsheet that you see in front of you is referred to as the housing continuum. So on the far left side, we see income brackets where people are earning less than $15,000. And on the very far right side, we see people earning income brackets of 100,000 or over. At the bottom, and corresponding to those different income brackets, are typical housing types that serve those income population groups. So you can see we go for everything from emergency temporary shelter over to market rate ownership and market rate housing. In addition to those income brackets, I have included data about Chaffee County local workforce, Chaffee County households, and what is considered an affordable rent for people in those different income brackets. So I think the important, well, one of the important elements here is that third line down where we see the percent of Chaffee County workforce in 2020. So Joseph just put a box, a blue box, around 60% of our area median income and below. So that is about a third of the workforce in Chaffee County falls in those income brackets. Why is that important? Because the traditional sources of funding that help us build housing to be permanently affordable serve those incomes. There are tenant selection criteria associated with the state and federal funds that help build affordable housing. And one of the tenant criteria is that they don't earn any more than 60% of an area median income. Joseph magically put where $15 an hour would lie on this housing continuum. And you can see that it's just over that 60% AMI cutoff for eligibility in traditional affordable housing projects. So if we were to strictly focus on state and federal funding resources for the development of new housing, we would be leaving out 2/3 of the Chaffee County workforce. Now, we are pursuing those kind of funding streams. However, after engaging in community conversations, we're recognizing that people in our community earning up to $100,000, sometimes even more, are still struggling to find housing. This project is focusing specifically on feedback from nonprofit entities and employers and other community partners. And what we've recognized is that without the state and federal funding, we can design projects to meet much more of our community needs in terms of the workforce that we have in Chaffee County. So the red box that you see on the screen now is demonstrating the population groups that we are trying to serve with affordable rents through Jane's Place.
Thank you, Becky. So we're going to dive into a lot of those pieces that Becky teed up a little bit deeper, but I wanted to make sure we're grounded in where we're talking about first. So you all who are familiar with Salida, when you enter Salida from the north on Highway 291, and it turns, it kind of veers to the east. The hospital is right here to your right as you're coming into town. The proposed property is this oddly shaped parcel on the corner of 291 and 3rd. And we'll talk a lot more about Jane, and I would love if anyone's willing that knew her personally for them to share any anecdotes about this. But one of the amazing aspects of this physical property is that it is owned and was owned by Jane herself and by her husband, Ron Ferris. And so not only are some of the elements that we're proposing originally part of the vision that Jane had for this property, but also the property itself is where she was envisioning these things happening. So some really deep resonations there, and it's really exciting. I'm going to pause here for a moment and first say that even though I grew up in Chaffee County, I never had the pleasure of knowing Jane personally. And yet the folks that I've interacted with as a part of building this concept that did know Jane and or were related to Jane have impacted me in such a way that it demonstrates the power of who she was. So I wanted to just pause real briefly. If there's anyone that would like to say something about Jane, please feel free to do so. Please don't feel any pressure to do so. We'll also be hearing from a couple other folks later about some Jane connections. Feel free to jump in if I didn't give enough time for that. So I want to walk through what Jane's Place is proposing to build. And at the highest level, we're proposing that it build 4 buildings, which have in them 17 housing units and 1 commercial space. And we'll walk through each of those elements now. So if you can imagine and put yourself put some wings on your back or pixie dust or something and lift yourself above Highway 291 and look south towards downtown Salida. That's the perspective with which we're looking right now. So at the bottom of the screen here, if you can see my cursor, is Highway 291. And then you can turn the corner here and go on 3rd Street towards Safeway or the courthouse. And many times this corner is taken on 2 wheels at maybe 35 or 40 miles an hour, relatively dangerous intersection. So one byproduct or benefit of Jane's Place will be a reworking of that curb line to make it slow down traffic, be more friendly to pedestrians, and an overall better gateway experience. So we're going to start with the corner building here, right on the corner of 291 and 3rd. We're proposing a two-floor mixed-use building, the top floor being two bedroom apartments devoted to workforce and housing those in need. And then the first floor is a really innovative nonprofit co-working space that would include not only working space for nonprofits, but also meeting space, as well as a mission-driven coffee shop. We're developing that coffee shop concept together with a local nonprofit named Achieve Inc. And they currently run a seasonal food truck named the Little Engine Eatery in Buena Vista, where they employ youth on the autistic spectrum and give them job skills through that food truck. So they're looking at expanding their program and their criteria and moving into this space to open a coffee shop, which is really exciting. The next building around is a single story building that we're calling the Adaptive building. And I'm really honored to say that in addition to honoring Jane's legacy, we're also going to be able to honor the legacy of Molly Gruther. This building will be named after Molly, and it will be called something like the Molly Gruther Adaptive Housing Building. And the reason we're using the word adaptive is very intentionally around this idea of flexibility. So this building contains 4 technically 1-bedroom apartments. However, those bedrooms are oversized and they can sleep anywhere between 4 and 8 folks, depending on whether we're arranging them with single beds or bunk beds or a mixture thereof. And so you can imagine that this building alone could have a capacity between 16 and 32 folks, depending on the needs. And what's really incredible is to think about during the winter, a subset of these units being reserved for partner organizations that are serving individuals and families in crisis. The other 2 units and then other units, all the units during the summer would be open for folks that need a place to stay anywhere from 1 night to a season. And a lot of these folks might be seasonal employees that are contributing to our workforce. They might be lift operators at Monarch, they might be river raft guides, they might be a forest crew that's volunteering with Southwest Conservation Corps or with the U.S. Forest Service coming to help maintain our public lands. So this is really envisioned as a vibrant, flexible building to house a variety of different folks, again, from 1 night to a season. As we move around the site, we get to this 2-story threeplex, I guess it is. On the first floor, we have 2 studio apartments that are designed to serve, again, individuals or families in need, but also others in transition, whether they're entering our workforce here for maybe a rotation at the hospital or some other need. These studio apartments are really designed to be the next step up in sort of permanency and transition, if you will. So offering leases from maybe a month to 3 months. And then on the top story of this building is a purpose-designed 5-bedroom unit meant to house AmeriCorps volunteers. And so if you're familiar with the AmeriCorps program, it's a program under which mostly young folks can volunteer for a year of full-time service. They get paid a very, very, very small stipend. And in exchange, they become a full-time employee of local nonprofits. This, as you can imagine, builds the capacity of local nonprofits greatly by being able to access very cheap full-time employees. And so by offering and designing and building AmeriCorps housing, we're not only offering that housing within the budget of those volunteers, but we're also building the capacity of local organizations to recruit more AmeriCorps members. On the corner and the first floor of that building is a management office, very intentionally located right in the middle of the site. And so this is where not only a housing authority employee would be based to manage this property and any other duties they might be assigned, but we're also in conversations with other community partners like Full Circle Restorative Justice or like the Alliance Against Sexual and Domestic Abuse to house employees here off hours and be able to offer services and resources to tenants and residents here. So we're really excited about the cross-pollination opportunities that office will provide. And then finally, the largest building is still just a 2-story building. It's an 8-plex of 1-bedroom apartments. And again, so if you think about the range of transition, we might be looking at someone who needs a place to stay for one night. They may be in crisis for whatever reason. Or we may be looking at someone who needs to get out of an unsafe situation and needs a place to stay for 1 to 3 months. Or maybe we're looking at a brand new recruit to our workforce, to our professional employee that needs to land somewhere so that they can accept a job. And they have a 6-month lease or a 12-month lease before they find their permanent place to live. So we're really excited about the ways in which Jane's Place will be able to serve so many different folks that are in transition. And none of those different folks would be served or be able to be served by a traditional low-income housing tax credit project, as Becky alluded to earlier, and primarily because those projects require a 12-month lease. And so this is a really important aspect and why we kind of kicked off the presentation with that housing continuum. I want to briefly just introduce or talk a little bit about the roles that the 2 primary partners on this are playing. I mentioned that I'm with the Chaffey County Community Foundation. We are a young, independent 501c3 organization that's committed to catalyzing and convening resources in Chaffey County for the common good. We are not a housing organization, nor do we want to get into the housing business, but we do care deeply about the need for affordable and flexible housing in Chaffey County. And so our role in this project has been to help catalyze and convene the partners, take these amazing kernels of ideas that were started with Jane and with Bob and with other community partners and say, how can we bring these together on this property to make this work? We're also going to be leading and have already kicked off a fundraising and philanthropic campaign to help contribute to Jane's Place. And then we're also going to be owning the land, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll turn it over to Becky to introduce real briefly the Housing Authority.
Thanks, Joseph. The Chaffey Housing Authority was born in October of last year, and the board convened for the very first time in February of this year. We just got off of a Zoom call a few moments ago from our second meeting. So the idea behind the Chaffey Housing Authority is to be an entity that promotes housing affordability throughout the county. And for this purpose, in this conversation, the board has given me the authority to continue carrying the conversation of Jane's Place forward with the idea that the Chaffey Housing Authority would own the buildings and be responsible for the management of the rental units, as well as really the maintaining of the culture that we wish to see at Jane's Place. So that would be the role that the Housing Authority plays. Joseph had mentioned that the Community Foundation will own the land, and we've baked in a way for, thanks Joseph, we've baked in a way for the operating budget of the project itself to pay a land lease back to the Community Foundation. When we first came up with this idea, Joseph agreed very readily to hold that money for the purpose of acquiring additional land for more affordable housing in the future. So it's a way for us to kind of build in a funding mechanism where there currently is none, so that we can continue to perpetuate creative projects like this in our community.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key aspects here is that this project is amazing in its own right for many different reasons, especially with where the visions originated and the community ties that this is going to serve. And yet, because of the amazing creativity of these partners at the table, we're looking at this much bigger and larger problem in the county of affordable and attainable housing and asking, how can Jane's Place not only serve and be an amazing project itself, but then lay the groundwork and provide concrete funding and models that can be replicated elsewhere. So it's a super exciting aspect to this project. We'll talk a little bit about the money. We're anticipating that Jane's Place will cost around $3.4 million total. And we're anticipating getting that money in two broad buckets. The first bucket being what I call commercial debt or traditional debt. As Becky alluded to, there's a variety of ways that housing is paid for, affordable housing is paid for in the traditional and sort of conventional sense. And one of the key ways that we're working to keep this project flexible is by financing it locally and financing it with private dollars. And so one key part of that, about 65% of the money is envisioned to come from debt. And we're working with local banks on that. The other broad bucket is broadly speaking philanthropy. And we've broken that down into three primary goals or targets. The first being what you might think of as more traditional grants. So one funder that's already committed funds to the project is El Pomar Foundation out of Colorado Springs. We're also looking at, we've also received feasibility funding from the Colorado Health Foundation. And we're working with Betcher Foundation, Gates Family Foundation, and the local Marijuana Excise Tax Advisory Board, all for potential asks throughout this year. We then get to a community campaign. I'm so honored to say that this community campaign is already having amazing success. We really formally launched this campaign about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and already generous folks have contributed or committed over $220,000. And so we're really excited about the ways in which folks want to not only see this project built, but also honor the legacies that it's built on. And then finally, working with employers to ask them, how can this project benefit your employees? And therefore, how can you contribute to make sure it's built? And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So just a quick reminder that if you have questions you want us to address during the presentation, please feel free to either chime in or use the chat. Otherwise, we're going to have a dedicated time at the end for questions, answers, and discussion. So you will not miss your chance to jump in. This is sort of just a visual to reinforce this idea that Jane's Place seeks to increase community control by decreasing our reliance on traditional or conventional methods of funding affordable housing. And primarily usually those come from low-income housing tax credits, or at the state level, our Division of Housing. And this slide kind of demonstrates that, and I'll let Becky walk through this.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah, so really the chart at the bottom of this slide demonstrates in the middle the financial contributions that the Department of Local Affairs Division of Housing typically brings to projects. Almost without hesitation. I mean, they want to make sure it's a good project, but very readily contributing $15,000 per housing unit that's constructed, or up to $30,000 in rural communities. And that's in the form of a grant. So there's no need to pay that money back. However, it comes with strings attached, and those strings are kind of articulated down below, is that we would have some limitations on the income of the tenants. We also have tenant selection criteria where the first come is first served. There's also limits on the amount of rent we can charge, which is affordable, right? Those are affordable rates that the Division of Housing has. And then what's not listed on here is the lease terms. They're all required to have a 1-year lease because the goal is for housing security. But as we mentioned, our population looks a little bit different, and we don't necessarily need full 12-month leases, as well as we have a need to reach beyond those income limits, especially up to $15,000. That's an incredibly low income, typically aligned with people who are living strictly on Social Security or Social Security disability. And our workforce, as you saw in that very first slide, spans a lot higher in terms of their income earning. So what we're proposing to our local employers is that with their contributions, we don't have to have any income requirements on our tenants, and we can give their employees a priority on the waiting list, which assists us with our workforce needs. And we can be flexible in our leasing terms. So we can do 3, 6, 9, or 12-month leases, depending on the situation. And we're agreeing to keep rent at 30% of the tenant's income, which by definition is what's considered affordable housing. So the definition of affordable is you're not spending more than 30% of your income on your housing expenses. This approach allows us to float rents. So if we do have higher income earners, we can charge them closer to market rate rents. And then when we have very low income earners, they're still paying an affordable rate, but the additional rent that we're earning from those higher income tenants can help subsidize the rent of the lower income tenants. So it allows for a really flexible over time too, approach to tenant and rent management.
Thanks, Becky.
Yeah.
So we're nearing the end of our formal presentation, just so you're all aware, there's hope. So we're going to move and talk a little bit about the timeline of the project. So Bob and Becky and I have probably been meeting about this for about 9 months or so. And it's really starting to pick up speed right now, which is really exciting. And so we're in this timeline or this stage where what we're proposing to build, what you've seen, is not a use by right of that property. That property is zoned commercial C1. And we're proposing something that's outside the bounds of what's currently allowed there. And so we're pursuing what's called a plan development approval with the city of Salida. That plan development approval process, or that plan development process, started on November 30th of last year with a joint work session between Planning and Zoning Commission and the Salida City Council. In that joint work session, we presented the project concept, asked for initial feedback or initial red flags. And to be honest, it was amazing to see the level of support that this project and concept garnered from both Planning Commission and City Council. There were definitely questions around how we're going to be dealing with parking and some other density issues, but on the whole, it was an extremely positive meeting. And so as we look forward, we're looking forward to the rest of that process, which will be reconvened in Planning and Zoning at the end of April, and hopefully we'll wrap up with an approval or thumbs up from City Council by June 1st. From there, we're really kind of hitting the ground as fast as possible, finalizing our financing, our fundraising, our construction documents, finding the appropriate developer contractor, and then entering into construction, hopefully by the end of the year. So I think, as you can see from the timeline, it's an ambitious goal, but one that, if we're on par with our current momentum, is definitely attainable. So we're really excited about that. I wanted to pause briefly at this stage and ask, I believe Mickey Hodges joined us. She's just going to offer a few thoughts and perspectives on this project from a community member's perspective. You're muted, Mickey.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'm not sure. I'm on my phone. I don't do Zoom on my phone very often. Thank you for allowing me to come in a little late. I had a big day. I work at the fairgrounds where we implement the COVID vaccines, and it's very exciting out there right now. I'm just a good friend of Jane's, and just a voice on this call to connect people to why we're doing this, and what Jane's Place means to somebody who knew her really well, like I did. I worked with Jane for about 18 years. We both moved into Chaffee County over 20 years ago, almost at the same time. And she really was on the forefront of starting classes for parents. Her driven goal was to keep families intact and to help children not be moved to foster care. Her work was passionate and full of love and full of grace. She was there for her families 100% of the time. It never mattered what time of day or night that they needed a support, she was there. Jean also brought a lot of money and different things into the community herself. She was a huge contributor in grant writing and supporting different pieces of family and youth initiative development in our area, and just a real dedicated public servant. She was contagious ball of fun and love, and I'm really honored to be able to get on a call like this and just let people know that in her memory, this will be just such an honor and right in line with all of the beliefs and work she did. And I miss her every day, but to be able to be a part of this and hopefully be able to talk to any of you to contribute and be a part of it with us, I would be honored. So I'm available just like Becky and Joseph and Robert, and I'm just thanking you all and wanted to give you a little hello on that.
Thank you so much, Mickey. Really appreciate you being here and your advocacy on this, and for reminding us at every step of the way about who Jane was and how we can honor and bake in her legacy into the project. So thank you very much. So that's the end of our formal sort of presentation, as it were. We want to open it up for discussion. If there's any questions, if there's any concerns, if there's any comments, ideas, suggestions. Here on the right, there's a couple of ideas about how, if you're passionate about seeing this project come to fruition, that you can get involved. Especially for Salida residents, if you are in support of this project, writing a letter of support addressed to City Council and/or Planning and Zoning Commission will really go a long way in helping to demonstrate that the community is behind this development concept. We would love for everyone listening now and listening to the recording later to consider contributing. As you hopefully understood from the presentation, one of the bedrocks of this concept is that we need to pay for it locally and/or pay for it with private donor dollars in order to make sure that it can serve the needs that we're saying it can serve. So that's really an important piece of this. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, it's being an ambassador for the project, helping to spread awareness about its existence and helping to advocate on its behalf in a variety of different contexts. So with that, I'm going to pause for a moment. If Bob or Becky would like to jump in with anything to add, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, we can hang out for a few minutes and see what questions come up. Again, you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself and just jump in.
This is Dixie Goldsby. Can you hear me?
We can, Dixie, thank you.
Okay. And we're not doing video, right? We're not doing video.
If you would like to, you can. No pressure to do so. It's up to you.
Okay, no, that's all right. I'll just, so I was just for a little history. So when Jane was alive, had she started this project? Or was it after her death that she left that in her will or whatever? I don't know how it really started.
So yeah, Becky, I'm sure can talk to that a little bit, and then I'm sure Mickey would also jump in as well.
Okay, just curious, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll let Mickey speak to the concept that Jane had, because I did not have the fortune to know her. But I will say that about a year and a half ago, through a housing and health initiative, my office was able to bring to the community a conversation about incremental development. So developing kind of smaller scale and how we might be able to design places for infill development within our community. And at one of those sessions, a landowner, not this current landowner, but a landowner, lifted her hand up and said, I have a parcel and let's design a project. And that's really where we started talking about this adaptive piece of housing. And then that fell through, but Mr. Grether, who's on the call with us right now, really kept that nugget of idea about how can we create housing that can be adapted over time. And he just kept fleshing out the idea. And then I'll pause and let Bob take over how Mr. Ferris got involved in this conversation, because I think we might have you to thank for that.
Well, I just happened to be out in my front yard raking leaves or whatever, and Ron just happened to show up across the street. I guess a friend had that house across the way, and of course we've known each other for quite a while, and I knew Jane very well. She was a good friend of my daughter, and you know, I don't know what happened. I guess I got to talking about, we were wondering what the other person was doing, and I said, well, I've been kind of trying to work on a housing project that would be kind of a unique project, and we were looking at a piece of property, and that kind of fell through. It just didn't work out, and so we're kind of looking again. He says, well, I got this property down on 291 and 3rd. I said, oh, really? Would you consider selling it? And he said, oh, well, yeah, absolutely. He said, you know, Jane and I had thought about doing a housing project of some kind at that point. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And so at that point, I contacted Becky and Joseph, and we got together with Ron, and the rest is history. So.
And was Jane alive then, or had she already?
No, she'd passed. Yes.
She had passed. Okay, so they had that property, and then yeah. Okay, great. Well,
And-
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I see Mickey unmuted. Mickey, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just backing up, Robert. There was just that this was always in Jane's mindset, that it was a real evident piece of what was missing in our area, to have housing that really supported all kinds of folks in different emergency areas, to just needing a leg up. Even her and I talking, I was a river guide here back in the 90s, and I had to live in my car and really wanted to build roots here, but had no way of making a down payment on something, or even making a first month and deposit payment on something. So her and I even spoke way back just on what it would be to have something to help people get a leg up, to help people have a place to keep their families safe if something went wrong in their certain housing situations. That's why I really am excited about this project, because this was in her thoughts years and years ago, and to see it come to life is amazing. It's truly like it had wings and I never knew it. It's amazing watching it happen, and it's really exciting.
This is
Thank you for-
Jane's
thank you.
daughter.
Go ahead.
I'm not, I'm a good friend.
Oh, I said this is Ellie, Jane's daughter. And
Oh, hi, Ellie.
Hi, Mickey. And I would just like to echo what Mickey said, that I would hear my mom talk about these clients that she cared so much about, but there was no place for them to go. And she would be trying to find this place or that place. Oh, this place will give them a spot for a few months. Just the struggle that she had and how much she cared about these clients. And so I know how much this would mean to her to have a safe place for them to be. It really is her dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. I love hearing those. And it's amazing too, just a brief observation, the meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, which was basically the same meeting, was much more focused on the nuts and bolts of the project. And this is bringing alive Jane's heart and Jane's legacy in a way that meeting 2 weeks ago didn't go down that track. And so I'm really thankful for you all being here and asking these questions and offering your perspectives. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts about this project that we can answer at this time? So I did put in the chat feature the website that you can go to learn kind of more, all the information that we presented and more. It's chaffeycommunity.org/Jane's Place. So please feel free to visit there. On the screen now is my contact information as well as Becky's information. We're both at your beck and call. If you have any ideas, questions, concerns, or you want more information about anything, please don't hesitate to call, email, or apparently I thought you would snail mail as well, because I put our addresses up there. So if you would like to contribute financially, you can do that on the chaffeecommunity.org website. And we will be holding those dollars specifically for this project. So want to hold another little space for other questions, contributions. Right. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you all supporting this project and really helping us continue to center Jane in it, because that's really so important. So thank you. Hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much. What a great project.
Thank you, Dixie, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Becky.